Hello everyone, and welcome to the 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐭𝐿𝐴 episode 114, I think. Today we had a special episode planned where we would be interviewing Andy, who does the voice for old and young 𝐴MPA in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, but that has been postponed until next week, where another guest may or may not be joining, depending on how many from the 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐭𝐿ACast cast is going to attend. So if it's just me and Daniel, there might be another special guest, but if it's 4 or more, then it'll just be us with no extra guest. And yeah. So, Daniel.
Jesse.
Why don't you go ahead and start us on the first piece of Zelda news before we get to the list.
Let's do that. So there is, you guys may all remember, because it wasn't that long ago, the 𝐺𝐺𝐸 that happened, as they were called, the 𝐺𝐺𝐸. Huge amounts of game files and all this stuff got leaked out, and we got tons of new info on some old games like A Link to the Past, Zelda 64, or Ocarina of Time in its very early development, things like that. And so, yeah, just another little random piece of news that came about that is an Ocarina of Time asset that came to light here. So this article comes from NintendoLife.com, who we love, by the way. The article headline is random. At one point, Triforce may have been collectible in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. This is kind of something we already knew, but the piece of news is not just about that. So it goes back in the days when we first played The Legends of Zelda Ocarina of Time, there were theories going around that the Triforce, the iconic 3-part symbol of power, wisdom, and courage from the series, was actually a collectible item in the game. It's one of those gaming myths that became legend over time, etc., etc. Just in my own side note, in one of the game's earliest ever trailers, there is actually a shot of it, so that those rumors weren't unprecedented at the time.
Yeah, I'll have the video that he's talking about on the edited version of this.
Yeah, so it's some neat really old beta footage where it shows Link like opening a chest and then the Triforce comes out and he actually gets it here, which again, it wasn't unprecedented based on the previous Zelda games that had come out at that time, all except for Link's Awakening. The other 3 all had featured the Triforce as something you could obtain at the end of the game, usually. But anyways, it wasn't in the final game, of course, as we all know. So this piece of information, though... Really
quick, turn your video off and back on, because your audio and video is unsynced.
Boom, how about that? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So, data miners working on this recently and illegally leaked Nintendo development etc. That's the 𝐺𝐺𝐸, have uncovered another nugget of information that may shed some light on this potent urban legend. As detailed by Gaming Reinvented data miner Mr. Cheese, great username by the way, on Twitter, uncovered an image in a folder that clearly shows the Triforce icon. Now, just again, a Daniel side note, the Triforce icon is on the the item quest status subscreen of the pause menu in Ocarina of Time. It's right nestled in the middle of the aliens. So the icon, the spot on the menu for it is there, basically. But yes, the data was found close to the image. There you are. You disappeared. You disappeared. 𝐵𝐵𝐵𝐵. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Okay, you're back though. Weird. It suggested that the name of the file may indicate Nintendo's intention at some point during development for the divine trinket to be obtainable. And it has some links to the tweets, but basically the icon that would fill that spot on the pause screen in the game was found, that file for that icon. So it's found in the game's files along with all the Sage Medallion icons that fit into those spots. The Triforce icon was found there too. So yeah, it's a neat nugget. It doesn't tell anything about where it might have been planned to appear in the game or anything like that, but that file for it to fill in that spot of the map screen is basically been recovered. And in those tweets, Mr. Cheese's tweets there, you can see he filled it in here, and you can see how it looks once it's all entered in there on that map screen there. So
yeah, like he rendered the actual file in the game to appear on the Triforce blocks. And is there more on this, or can we go into our speculation?
Right. Basically the only other real thing to note here is that all we know is that the asset for it exists. This doesn't go over anything as far as where in the game it would have appeared or how it would have been found or anything like that. Just that it does that spot on the menu where the Triforce is those empty slots for it. There was files to fill those spots in with the Triforce, so that's that we got. So yeah, we can get into speculation territory here.
So one piece of trivia is that the Triforce actually does exist physically in the game, but it's outside of the map. So in the royal garden area where you talk to young Princess Zelda, and she starts talking about the Triforce and her dream and everything, and whenever you see the Triforce in the cutscene, it's already loaded onto the map when you're in the room with Zelda, but it's like 50 feet below the ground, so you can't see it. But whenever the cutscene starts, that's where it loads the Triforce from. So it's kind of interesting.
It's just there off the map to be used for the cutscene, but it does. That's because that game's cutscenes, like many Zelda games, aren't just like video files that play at a certain point, but they actually render out and act out all those cutscenes. It's rendered in game, basically.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, if the cutscene happens and Link's in it, and he'll always have whatever equipment you have equipped. So if you're wearing a particular tunic, that's what he'll be wearing in the cutscene. Whereas if it was just a straight up video file, it would just default to whatever. And that's something like in Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition that bothers me. Is that if you wear an alternate costume or have an alternate weapon, it'll just have the default ones no matter what, because that game uses just video files for its cutscenes instead of rendering them in the game. So there's a little nugget for you.
Yeah. So my theory and speculation on this is that before it became Ocarina of Time, it was, Zelda 64, and even with the title Ocarina of Time, they had it planned for like one disc on the disk drive that had everything in it. But when the disk drive stopped selling, or didn't sell as well as they thought it would, they ended up cutting a bunch of the content and trying to make it as complete of a game as they could without the extra story that they had planned out. So like a condensed version of what could have been. And then they planned on adding that stuff later on as one of the expansions for Ocarina of Time. And what a lot of people don't know is that Ocarina of Time not only had one expansion planned, but it actually had two. One ended up 𝐼𝐴 Zelda becoming Master Quest, and Zelda Gaiden ended up becoming Majora's Mask, but they were both expansions for Ocarina of Time that ended up becoming their own thing. And but originally it was 𝐼𝐴 Zelda, which added in a ton of stuff, but then they separated it into two different things, where one remixed the current dungeons and the other added in new areas and dungeons, and then they ended up just making it its own game because it became too big on its own just to be an expansion. And so like when Ocarina of Time's expansion packs ended up becoming canceled or whatever, that's how Majora's Mask came about, because they had all that stuff for like extra dungeons and everything, and they spent so much time on it that they wanted to use it, but they couldn't because no one bought the disk drive. So Miyamoto just wanted to move on to the GameCube Zelda game, which ended up becoming Wind Waker. And that was around the time when they had that 2000 Space World demo of like Link fighting against Ganondorf.
Right. And
I'm guessing that came about because they were going to continue that art style of Ocarina of Time, but then they decided, after they released Majora's Mask, there's the quote from Miyamoto where he talked about using that art style so many times he wanted to do something completely different, and that's when one of the developers just doodled Toon Link, and they went with that. But yeah, so my thought is that in one of the planned expansions, there would have been 3 additional dungeons, and then instead of getting the medallion, you would get the Triforce. And another beta fact, the medallions, you used to be able to use them with their screenshots where it's you can equip them to the Ocarina.
Right. It's interesting. I think the medallions went through a couple of different sort of phases, because there's screenshots where, like you said, you could equip them to put them in the Ocarina.
Yeah, I think.
And there's also ones where they're just equipped on their own. And I think there was some files where, and I might be wrong remembering this, where you would combine it with the bow. Instead of having fire arrows as their own item, you would combine the fire medallion with your bow and arrow and get fire arrows that way.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
That's what I thought as well. And then with the Ocarina, putting the medallion in the Ocarina possibly would have been the thing that would have let you warp to that pad that has that medallion symbol on it. Since you're using the medallion with the Ocarina, and then you warp to the pad that has the symbol of the medallion on it. So, but that's speculation. Like the medallion
also,
being
speculation-wise, I think the medallion on its own probably would have done some special
like
effect. Like Din's fire was probably what the fire medallion would have done on its own, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the water one, I think, isn't the water one actually ice? You get it at the water temple, but the symbol's ice.
It's an ice symbol, yeah.
So that could have been like the ice arrow and stuff. And you get the light arrows in the Temple of Time, where you also get the light medallion. So there's a connection there as well. And then there's weird ones, like what would the shadow medallion end up doing?
That's a good question. Kind of shadow arrows, what could that have been?
Yeah.
What could that have been like?
But just to be clear on this, all of that, like how it would be used, is speculation, but there are actual screenshots of Link using the medallions. Like there's screenshots where he has the medallions equipped in the Ocarina, and there's screenshots where he just has them equipped on their own. So that's why we speculated that if you would have equipped it on its own, then like using the red medallion would have just been Din's fire, as opposed to getting it on its own.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it too, there's that area outside the entrance to the Shadow Temple, and it has the fire medallion symbol on the ground. But you have to use Din's fire there to light all the torches.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, the only thing that makes sense would have been, in my mind at least, would have been for that.
Yeah.
Those spells probably made their own item.
Yeah. So it would have been interesting to like how the concept of you need the medallion from completing the fire temple to go into the shadow temple. So it could have been their way of like making sure you didn't skip a dungeon.
Yeah, no sequence breaking for you.
Yeah, like the shadow and spirit temple is reversed from the way that it possibly would have been planned, which is why on that screen the spirit temple is before the shadow temple. See, there's a lot of debate about that, about which is the right order to do it. I've always done shadow and then spirit. Yeah, like water. That's how the game guides had it as well. And that's what Navi tells you to do, if you as well. But technically, you can do it the other way around. And some people say because of that pause screen, that that's the correct way. But I mean, Navi really does nag you to go the correct intended path, right? So in my head, that feels like the right way. When you have to do the water temple, she's like, "There's a cold breeze coming from," and it's like, "Well, I don't have a sweater." Shut up! I'm bow hunting. Yeah, it's like, find me a sweater, and I'll go.
I'm catching pose. I'm busy.
Yeah, he's like, I'm literally wearing a skirt and a t-shirt. Why would I go where there is ice and snow?
Because exactly. Yeah. So,
I guess.
but I don't think that actually just coming back to the Triforce thing.
Yeah.
I don't think it ever would have ever been an equipable item, even if you did get the Triforce in the game. It's probably
No,
something that would
it's
just
never
sit
been
on there for
equipable in
completion.
a Zelda game.
Yeah.
Because if
exactly.
it was equipable, then you would literally have the power of a god to do whatever you want.
You just win.
Yeah.
No matter what. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it would have just been in the expansion, because they still had the expansion planned after they released Ocarina of Time. So, so the game released in '98, and even up until like late '99 or early 2000, they still had plans for it to release as a expansion disc. So I think that's where the Triforce could have potentially came in. Like, there would have been 3 additional dungeons, or it would have changed the dungeons around to where now if you go through the remixed Spirit Temple, maybe you get the Triforce instead. Because they already had dungeons where you had to go through them twice, like the Shadow Temple and the Spirit Temple. So they could have had it to where the other 3 temples, the Fire, Water, and Forest, would have also been rearranged to where you would have to go through them as a child or adult or whatever, the same as the others. So, but that's just speculation on how I think it could have been. And then, of course, as we said in the beginning, there's always one of the first things Nintendo showed of beta Zelda 64 was Link walking into what people call the Unicorn Fountain and just opening the chest to get the Triforce, like in Wind Waker, because Nintendo likes to reuse unused ideas.
True. There's a quick question in the chat if we would want to see ROM hackers try to reimagine or recreate the Ura Zelda expansion. I have 2 personal issues with that. So many times fans have tried and the projects go nowhere and they just kind of fold and collapse in on themselves and just nothing comes of it. Many better men than me have tried, that's for sure. But I think that ultimately it would all just be speculation. We don't know enough about Ura Zelda, and also Nintendo reuses unused stuff so much that probably all that stuff got put into other games anyways.
Yeah, like Majora's Mask.
Exactly.
A lot of
so I think
was...
if anyone were to successfully recreate Ura Zelda, it would be a lot of stuff from other games, basically from later Zelda games.
Yeah. Like what was it? One of the big misconceptions is that a lot of people think that Master Quest is Ura Zelda, because in Japan, instead of being called Master Quest, it's literally called Ura Zelda. But that's just because that was what everyone knew was going to be coming, so they just kept the same title. But there are interviews with Miyamoto and Aonuma where they talk about how Ura Zelda would have added like new dungeons and items and everything, not just remixed it, which is why like I said, they had the one Ura expansion planned, but it became so big that they split it into 2 different expansions. One ended up becoming Master Quest, which was just remixed dungeons, and the other one would have had the new additional content. And Ura became Master Quest, and the other became Majora's Mask, because they had all that stuff ready and waiting, and instead of Aonuma being like, well, all these ideas are going to be wasted, I want to work on a new Zelda game for 64 so I can use this, and then Miyamoto was like, well, you have 1 year. And that's how they were able to do it, because it was all already there. They just had to like put it in a different world instead of Hyrule, which is kind of why I think, since they may have already had the areas made, because they said they did this in Twilight Princess as well. They had the areas already made, and they just needed a way, like an overworld, to connect them all. Which is why in Twilight Princess, you have all these big areas like Ordon Village and Kakariko Village, but then the path to get to them is like these tiny little narrow paths. Because in that game, they made all of those important areas first, and then put them in different places and just tried to make Hyrule fill to connect them all in a weird way, which is why there's so many crazy narrow paths. So, I'm just going on and on about random Zelda facts.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. Also,
yes, go ahead.
In Twilight Princess, because I love this, Aonuma originally wanted you to start the game as a wolf instead of as a human, because while spending the night at a hotel, he woke up late for a meeting or a presentation or something and was confused, didn't know where he was, and he thought that would be a good idea to start the Zelda game. But then all of the developers were like, no. You have to explain how he becomes a wolf. So then, and they also switched the area for Ordon Village and Kakariko Village as well. So like, they would have been in different areas, which they did in Breath of the Wild with Korok Forest and the Great Plateau, right?
Kakariko Village, wasn't it?
Kakariko Village?
Because then Kakariko would have been at basically the base of, or right near Death Mountain.
Yeah.
Where it traditionally is. So
that's why they switched those areas. And then Twilight Princess 2 was canceled so they could make Link's Crossbow Tree, which sold way more, like 1 million or 2 million more copies than Wind Waker did.
Every time you mention that, it breaks my heart. Yes.
So that's why that explains Skyward Sword as well. Why it's like you have these 3 major areas and then the sky just connects them. And they broke that tradition with Breath of the Wild, to where they're like, let's just make this huge world and then create the different areas inside. That way, instead of branching narrow paths to get there, you can enter from all sides. So, and that worked out extremely well. So, Daniel, I guess this is the end of this topic. Do you want to have any last words for the 52 people watching?
Yes.
56.
I just want to remind, well, nothing related to this topic, but I'm actually just going to remind the chat, though I'm quite far through the game and everything, and I've been playing it lots, and it's great. Not everybody in this chat may have finished the game or not, so let's avoid putting spoilers for Age of Calamity in the chat. Please and thank you, everybody. Just out of respect to our fellow viewers and our fellow Zelda fans who maybe haven't gotten as far or through the game as you guys have. So nothing posted in the chat has been a spoiler for me personally, but again, yeah, just it's great if you finished it, and I'm sure there's great places to discuss that. And I think at a later date, when I think more people have had time to catch up, then we can. I think I would love to get everybody, all 4 of us, on to like really get into it and everything. But I know Geek says she hasn't gotten very far into the game. I'm not sure about Tubes. So, for example, so yeah, just let's just avoid any spoilers, please and thank you. I'm gonna leave it in the mods that are here. They're capable hands monitoring that. But yes, please and thank you, everybody. Just out of respect to your fellow viewers.
And before we get to the next topic, since everyone is here now, we had like 60 something people for a moment. Next week we are having the interview with the voice actor who does young and old Impa in Breath of the Wild and Age of Calamity, because the old voice and the young voice are actually the same person. She was supposed to be on today, but it got rescheduled for next week. And last week we had our friend Joe, who's been on like 3 or 4 times. And then we're going to be having some other people that are related to Breath of the Wild and some that are not related to Breath of the Wild on. So be excited for special guests coming in the upcoming weeks, because since the podcast has now come back to a weekly podcast instead of like once a month like it was before, because my hand was paralyzed, for those who don't know, and now it's getting better. So and I've finally moved to a new place, so I actually have space to do stuff. So Highland Gamescast now continues. Yes. Daniel, do you want to start out the second topic?
Yeah, sure beans.
Yeah, explain what it is for the people watching.
Okay, so you guys, we've done this before. This is nothing new. You guys like it when we get into these list articles about Zelda, particularly really bad theories and stuff like that.
Because
and we kind of go through them and
we do make our own lists. Yeah,
we do.
And some of our most popular videos is like, I think I'm really proud of this. I have one of the highest viewed, and for a while it was the highest viewed review for Breath of the Wild, which was my top 10 best and worst of Breath of the Wild. That like quickly got over 1 million views.
That's because you played the best of both worlds, or the best and worst of both.
So we continued doing different lists on like hidden details or beta stuff that was cut from the game, and a bunch of other
stuff we want to see.
Videos. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So since all of our stuff, like, we physically show on the screen what we're talking about, so no one can be like, oh, this is clickbait, or that's fake, that wasn't there. Because we literally show the interview where 𝐴𝐿numa's like, hey, this is what Zelda was going to be. And then other people are like, no, it's just Master Quest, we already got it. But then there's like the interview where 𝐴𝐿NUMA and Miyamoto's literally like, yeah, it would have added new dungeons and stuff. But then there's still people complaining, being like, no, it wouldn't have added anything except remix dungeons. It's like, well, the guy who made it says different, so.
Yeah.
And then the most common one was people saying Super Mario FX wasn't going to be a real game or something. But then there's the interview where Miyamoto was like, yeah, we tried to do it, but it wouldn't work because the Super Nintendo wasn't playable. But they actually had a working Mario and Luigi in 3D running around on the Super Nintendo, which isn't that hard to believe because there's other 3D games on Super Nintendo.
Right. I think with the Super Mario FX thing in particular, the reason people say, oh, it was never a game is because Dylan Cuthbert, who works at Argonaut Games and was instrumental in the development of Star Fox on Super Nintendo, basically denied it and said, no, there was no Super Mario FX. It was an internal name we used for the Super FX chip, but that was it. Yeah. But the thing is I always, denial is there's a lot more grain of salt to take with people, game developers and stuff, denying games than there is confirmation. The game developer confirms something, the yes is a yes, basically. But if they say no, it might just mean no because I'm not allowed to talk about it, no because I signed an NDA, or no because I didn't work at that department of things and I actually didn't know about it. And there's so many variables.
The Wii
there.
U will not replace the Switch.
Vice versa.
The president of Nintendo saying that there's only going to be one Switch model, and then they released 2 more Switch models, the mini and then the revised original. And then even with the 3DS, Miyamoto, in an interview like weeks before the XL was announced, was like, no, fans don't have to worry about us releasing another model because they go out and buy this one then the next one comes out.
There's so many 3DSs now though, so.
And it's like,
so it's
the situation with him working at Argonaut and then developing the FX chip. The thing is, like, you have situations like that because, like, there's the Hyrule Warriors team that works on the game. There's the team that worked on that spin-off Cadence of Hyrule.
Yeah.
And then there's Monolith Soft, who's working on their own Zelda game right now. So it's like, and then there's Tantalus, who's hinted and rumored at working on a remake of another Zelda game. But it's like none of those companies are really going to know what Miyamoto or 𝐴𝐿NUMA themselves are planning privately.
Yeah. Exactly. And so for him to say no, he probably didn't, I don't think he was lying. I think he just genuinely believed that it was a no.
Yeah.
But then when he says no, it was just a code name for the chip we were using when working on Star Fox, And then Miyamoto says, well, yeah, we had this game planned and it didn't work out. And eventually it changed and evolved and everything. It's Mario 64 came to light. That just seems a lot more like, okay, well, probably Dylan there wasn't working on that game, so he didn't know that it ever existed. Not that he was dishonest.
And that's always the weird thing is like, in the comments, like people would say that, but then on screen you literally have the interview where Miyamoto's like, yeah, we're working on this Super Nintendo 3D Mario game, but it didn't work out. So it's like you literally have him saying it, but then there's people that's denying it, and it's so you get these lists where like on one that we did, someone made a list video. I won't say who because I don't want people to go and watch it because it's very horrible, but they say like every link is the direct son or descendant of the previous link, where that's only true in one case of Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, and then it's not his son, it's like his great grandson. So it's just a really weird thing. So like we make these videos covering other people's lists that have everything completely wrong, or it's just so mind-blowingly horrible that you have to cringe and laugh at it. And there's also the fact that on this channel, because the lists and the videos we do, we provide the proof of everything we're saying on screen. Like if we say something that sounds weird or ridiculous, then you can just look at the screen and you can see like the quote from the person who is making the game or video footage of it. So we try our best to clear up all of the misconceptions, which we have a video on going over. Daniel does the voice of it, and it goes over like the top 10 misconceptions of the Zelda series. And it got so long that we split it into 2 videos to where it's like 2 top 5 videos, but it covers stuff like Termina not being real and stuff in Hyrule Historia being wrong. So
yes,
go check those videos out. I'll link them in the description below. Daniel, now that we've explained, that's it for now, but a lot of rumors, news, and details are slowly leaking out. So please, stay subscribed and notified, and join our Discord to make sure you stay up to date on all Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 news. And you can find our Zelda podcast, the 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐭𝐭𝐞𝐫, here on YouTube and on iTunes, where we have had many guests who have worked on the Zelda series, and have shared a lot of amazing stories about voice acting, such as Patricia Somerset voice acting as Zelda, Mike Drucker on Zelda's writing or translation team, coming up with the jokes in the game, stories behind the names of characters that he created. Please subscribe and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you. If you are a fan of our Zelda videos like this, Zelda Theories, our Zelda podcast, the 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐭𝐼 on iTunes, we would all really appreciate your support at patreon.com/GameOverJesse. That and buying our t-shirts will get you and your YouTube or Twitch a shout out every week on our 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐭𝐼. And if you send in a photo of yourself in our Game Over Jesse or 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐭𝐼 t-shirt, we can use it for promotion at the end of some of our videos.